and welcome to Throwing the Podcast, episode 9. I am your host, Club Kyle, and today I'm joined by the literal hothead with the heart of a bard. Fury, how you doing, buddy?
Right, how are you?
Pretty good. And also joined by another DM. There can be only one! Jacob, how you doing?
I'm doing alright, though, real quick, I personally think it's more of a spirit of a bard than a heart of a bard.
What's the difference?
Da-dun. Shh. And speaking of D&D classes, we're continuing the Q&A thing I had with our characters, except this time it's only one character and DM. The questions are going to be for Solis and for Jacob as the DM of this world. To set ground rules, the questions I'm going to ask are non-spoilerly towards Jacob. I can't be like, so how do we kill Cassandra?
Which the answer is we punch her really hard together.
So, what you do, that is an excellent question. So, what you do is you go and you take the entire city of Alestria and push it and move it somewhere else, and then there you go. You destroy the land, and thus she goes into a mental breakdown.
Yes.
And you can get the drop on her.
Okay, well, regardless.
If you say hit him really hard.
Yep, anyways.
And then you hit them
We're
really
going to start
hard.
with you, Fury, because Solis has been someone who I've really wanted to question. I know the answer to this, but for confirmation, what did you base Solis off of, personality-wise and design-wise?
Okay. So, Solis is based off of a very short-lived character in the My Little Pony franchise, I won't deny. The benevolent ruler of the sun, Princess Celestia, in a nightmare confronted what would have been her if she'd gone evil in the beginning of the series instead of her sister, and the evil pony that came, the white pony with a mane of fire, was known as Daybreaker. So, taking the idea of a fiery paladin kind of person, I went and based upon that, decided to go with the Dragonborn, as I just have an inherent love for all things draconic. This is also why Solis has white face scales, is to harken back to the Daybreaker thing, and also why combine that with the Phoenix Soul Sorcerer in order to get some more fiery techniques in there. Because Paladins can do the Radiant thing, but fiery thing, that's more of a Sorcerer. They're both charisma-based casters, so I figured a multi-class between the two would actually allow for some harmonious things. Particularly chose Phoenix Soul Sorcerer because of the Mantle of Fire ability, allowing Solis to literally set herself on fire once per day, which I thought played into the fiery main thing.
Which, to follow up on that, why Paladin as the multi-class? Why not Fighter or anything else with the armor? Or why not just pure Sorcerer?
Because despite being based off the evil version of Celestia, I still wanted to retain some of that sun, like the holy part of it in there, because I just felt it fitted correctly. And also, Daybreaker's shown wearing full armor in like full on battle armor in the series, and so I definitely wanted to maintain that part. And I thought that I could have just gone Sorcerer Fighter. You're absolutely right, but I felt that a Paladin fit into what she like the original. I just felt it fitted the concept better to have this. And then me and Jacob went from there. That the monastery where Solis grew up was a worshipper of a sun god, and so it just made sense that if he wasn't going to be a monk, what other classes serve the gods? Well, a paladin does, and a paladin's a charisma-based caster, which would multi-class well with sorcerer.
All right.
So that's really why I went with paladin, and I felt it fit the sun part of the concept.
All right. And speaking of which, Jacob, next question is for you. What went into what was the thought process in making the Tao Xian as the goddess, the monastery, and the father as well? Like all of that stuff. Like what went into that for you?
So, what really went into that was, I had a pretty I had a really blank canvas when it came down to the creation of the land. I wanted to do something outside the realms of what I had already been doing. A lot of the stuff that I have gone and put in the works for has been with a lot of Greek mythology, Roman mythology, stuff of that sort, stuff that you might typically see side of your typical fantasy medieval type of setting. And so when it came down to Taoshi the god and the father, I first started off with the goddess herself. I was like, all right, well, there seems to be a lot of, a lot of gods are depicted as, as males. So I was like, you know what, let's go with the Japanese themed female based type of goddess, and or at least something along the lines of like Asian type of culture with it. And so I was like, all right, so this entire world is separate from my main world. They don't have this type of god in my world at the moment. Let's go with a goddess of the sun. And I felt that based with Asian culture, that felt a sort of a very complementing connection between the two, especially since there are quite a few mythos out there in the that are part of Asian culture that has something to do with those revolving around either the sun or fire, stuff of that sort.
All right.
And then with the
I was going to interject that, like, in Asian mythos, there is literally a god of the sun, a goddess of the sun called Amaterasu.
oh yeah, and so with in terms of the father, considering what I had as a basis for what was happening in that world, I figured, let's go along, let's keep the trend going with that type of culture and have it be passed down as sort of a um, orderly structure, I suppose. Because in a lot of Asian cultures, when it comes down to that, pride and um, stuff within family, it's very important to people. And in some sense, the father is sort of like kind of bringing the rest of the Taoshian together as one huge family. Of course, with order, but he was tasked with continuing on her word and the teachings of her. And so he kind of became sort of a head of the whole Taoshian as both a figurehead and as the top ranking sort of family member with the whole culture itself. So that was kind of the thought process behind that.
All right. And Fury, speaking of that, what was your original vision for Solis, and how has the party or the world around you changed that original intent? Because as any D&D player knows, you never finish with your original intent.
No, you're absolutely right. There is, yeah, the things have changed. When I first created Solis, she was certainly more. Obviously, I couldn't necessarily make her evil because that would go against the principles of the party, as it were. And I couldn't think of. I mean, it is possible to play an evil character in a good aligned party. You just need to have some kind of overarching common ground. Like, this is the problem right now. I will help you to deal with this problem, but then I'm going my own way, kind of thing. But I couldn't think of anything like that. So I decided to make. She wants to do good. She's always wanted to do good. She was just more inspired by the like tyrannical aspects of Daybreaker. That she still sees herself as doing good. She just doesn't hold back in that regard.
She's
very
more.
brazen
She's the
and
antithesis.
brash.
She's the antithesis of chaotic good, effectively.
Yeah, she did what she thought was right without thinking about what could happen as a result. And I think the party has definitely encouraged her to think more, like especially during the last arc with the two cities. Like, if Solis at the beginning of the campaign had gone into that situation, she would have just straight up murdered the guy straight, just gone in there, fire main blazing, and settled it with violence. But I think the party has had an influence, especially I think it was Garrick specifically mentioned about uh you know I can't I had a thought, I just lost it, but it's like the idea of thinking about it rather than just doing it. I think it was either Garrick or Korvac mentioned something about thinking things through and
It was probably
not
Garrick.
letting
It could be
not
Corvac.
letting things get to you too much, and
Yeah,
you know
yeah,
being more of a restrained person. There's If you look back through these series, you'll find some of these moments where we were
yeah,
talking about
yeah.
stuff like
Which,
that.
speaking of which, Jacob, what was your original plan with Solis, and how's that changed? Because for every player intent, there is a DM intent, and they tend to clash more often than they don't. As a DM myself, I
So,
can attest to this.
so for Solis's intent, her original plan it was to kind of see where she goes, kind of set her up on a path if she chose to go down that route to kind of explore the world and get another view, another look at it than what she might consider the world. Granted, there's many great evils in it. She also needed to learn that there's also a lot of good in it. Thus, the introductions of the party. And that is still her plan as of right now, unless if she decides to do something completely different. But with her, I also wanted to not just I wanted to limit her, not limit her to just that. With the inclusion of the Taoshian and the other tribes, I figured this would be a good opportunity for her to go through and little by little uncover uncover the history and the teachings and the ideology and views of the different tribes and what makes each and every one of them connected while learning herself what it means to be, you know, kind of at a balance with the world, not so much going through and having her entire life be consistent of violence out of just pure spite, but that of fighting for what she'd consider to be peaceful or fighting for whatever views she believes in and seeing the good in both men, woman, child, dragonborn. It's just a whole different perspective on the world, and she is still in the process of doing that. If she decides to derive from that path, well, that's her own stage to take.
Hmm. And speaking of Solis's path, Fury, your character has gone up and down a lot in this campaign in terms of their faith. They started the campaign with they fully believed in their god, and basically it was like, I devote myself to this, only to find out that their god was dead, but they still kept their faith, only to find out again that a fragment of them still yet exists, giving the hope of the possibility that her goddess can't be revived. How has Souls dealt with that constant change of information, this constant change of faith, so to speak?
Not well. She hides it mostly on the inside, but it has affected her. She's obviously, again, I think it was in a moment with Korvac where she had actually had quite a crisis of faith. If it was towards when she saw, like, not long after she saw Taoshan herself being killed, she really did start to have a crisis in that. And the party's definitely been a crutch to lean on for that. They're some of the few people she's felt she could actually talk to throughout the times. A lot of she still has a home in the monastery, she always has, but
Mhm.
a lot of monks and things like that, they can be a bit too caught up in their faith, as it were, to really. She's almost scared as such because she's been brought up in such a strong religious environment that because she's having these doubts in the teachings or is formulating her own thoughts that she might be rejected. I don't think she'd be able to talk to any of the other monks or the father about these thoughts that she's having. She feels that she can trust the party, having not been brought up in that kind of an environment. That
Which
like
is
they would be able to help her with that. Although she's still having a lot of trouble actually opening up because she's just stubborn.
That's understandable, honestly, when it comes down to that. Especially if you look through a lot of history and stuff like that. A lot of people have different, views from what they believe in. Um,
Yeah,
and it is really hard to go and speak to someone of
like
that same faith that you share with them
I
and
mean,
see if they're be willing to be, I guess, be accepting of what you
like
currently believe in.
if we want a if we honestly want a real world example of this sort of ideology and this in practice, look no further than Catholicism with the birth of Protestants. Like
Hmm.
historically, while the Protestant faith lasted, it was met with heavy criticism from the Catholic Church, thus deviating and thus creating two subsects of the same religion. Like honestly, religion has been like while it can bring good to people like with through faith and hope and everything, it can also be used as a tool of subjugation. And that point of history, the Catholic Church was basically giving you a way to buy into heaven. And while the situation is very different here because as far as we're aware the Tao Shan doesn't do anything like that, it's still a legitimate fear when you have this faith, and when you deviate from what is known, you tend to you tend to run the gambit of will they accept this or will I be cast out? And speaking uh, of that as well, another question for Solus: how does she view like Cassandra? Like, obviously there's a lot of hatred there, but like, is there anything beyond just pure hatred?
There's almost an element of pity, especially after what Korvac, oh no, sorry, Garrick told her about, the problems of a mortal becoming a god. There's almost a small amount of pity there for us,
Mhm.
as well as like, like what trauma have you lived through that could cause you to think this is the right thing to do? She almost pities Cassandra that she's had to take this kind of path, especially now that herself has been deviated from more of a she's also slightly thankful to Cassandra as well as the party, because through her encounters with the witch, and the party's own words, she's realized that had she not met the party and gone on this adventure, she may well have ended up in a very similar situation
Mm.
to Cassandra, having that kind of attitude that my way is right, and because that was, she did often think that the world must be cleansed of evil, and the only way to do that would be to destroy large swathes of the population. But now she's seen that's wrong.
Because ultimately, with Cassandra, it failed. Like, she destroyed what she thought was evil only for it to bring ruination to her home. And the icing on the cake with Cassandra is that she didn't learn her lesson. Unlike Solus, who did learn their lesson before it was too late, Cassandra refused to learn her lesson. Like, she's still doing the same exact crap she's doing, and it's going to lead to the same ruination, but she's under this belief that somehow it won't. Like, it's yeah, like I agree. Like Solus and Cassandra are very similar, but Solus is the better person. I would even argue like the stronger person because she was able to acknowledge when it was wrong.
Well, stronger person in the better person, I suppose you could say. I think in terms of raw power, Cassandra definitely has Solus top,
Well,
but
strength of character, not strength of actual blaze strength, because obviously.
Strength of character is definitely Solis definitely tops Cassandra in
Actually,
that department.
yeah, let me put it like this: people often combine strength and power as if they mean the same thing. But they really are different. Strength is more your internal strength, who you are as a person, how you can get through a situation, the core of what you are. Whereas power is just whether it's through magic or through control, it's just a never-ending cycle where you allow pride and greed to overwhelm you until you have nothing left. Basically taking everything from everyone until you supposedly are satisfied, only to discover that there is simply emptiness within. Like there is a legitimate difference between strength and power, in my opinion. True,
yeah,
Cassandra's more powerful, but Solus herself is stronger than Cassandra. At least that's just my interpretation.
yeah, if we're talking about internal strength rather than basically I can admit, Solis can admit that her original mentality is wrong. She can't blow up a planet like Cassandra can, but she could admit she's wrong. That's the kind of, Cassandra is a planet breaker, or along that kind of lines. Solis is stronger internally. She can say, "No, I was wrong."
She has the strength to admit that. And speaking of which,
Yeah.
Jacob, I'm just curious because this is a little deviating from the path of what we've been talking about, but I am just genuinely curious. What went into the inspiration of how you implemented the Raven Queen and, in your world, the Raven King?
So the implementation with that one was that you guys were gonna eventually encounter the Shadowfell. That was just gonna be something that was inevitable to happen. But while us creating that, since all the elves have their own deriving, I guess you could say, ancestors. When it came down to the Shadowfell, I'm like, all right, well, there's the I know there's the Feywild, I know there's the Shadowfell, but you know, the elves came to this plane of existence for a reason. What is that reason? And it occurred to me that, all right, well, what if their entire home just wasn't there anymore? That they were forced to migrate, not out of pure happiness, but out of pure fear. And so I decided, all right, what could honestly cause that much distraction? And then it dawned on me that while talking with some people, I heard about the Raven Queen. Went digging around. I'm like, okay, this could work. But I've never heard from the people I've talked to, I've never heard about anything about there being a Raven King. So I was like, you know what? Let's mix this up a bit. The Raven Queen is going to be, instead of being the main powerhouse, they are going to be nothing but a vessel. And I decided to go with the idea of the Raven King being the main person who would provide the Raven Queen of that power. That the Raven Queen is just going to be nothing more than just a vessel, though claimed to the Raven King to be, his wife. They are still not as strong as the Raven King. They are just a mere pawn in the whole scheme of things. So that's kind of how I decided to implement the Raven Queen and the Raven King into my world. Since the idea of having both a Raven King and Raven Queen piqued my curiosity. And typically there's only just one. I wanted to implement something a bit different, and thus the Raven King was created.
Can you guys hear me? Ah,
Yep.
there. My mic
Yes,
just
hello?
was weird. My mic was weird.
Okay.
Anyways,
Quote 1.
but following up on that, going to the creation process, sometimes when you make a character, they're not what you intended them to be. And I think with you, the biggest, most obvious example of that, Jacob, is the character of Helena. So I am just. How did you want the party to perceive her? And how has that drastically changed from how we do see her now? Because something tells me this was never the intent.
So you you were right about that one. So the thing with Helena was that her original creation was supposed to be seen as her being sort of a beacon of hope to her people, at least for a little while. She she was supposed to be someone who could go through and do what she thought was best for the people, so that way she could help them see a better tomorrow, so that way they could eventually, whenever she passed on, those who took over her would be able to continue the work that she's put in to keeping the population, well, not the population, but the people alive and well and healthy as she has left it, no matter who took her next place, so long
Which
as they so long as they're able to go and continue what she was capable of doing.
And then, of course, there comes the old, ideology of the pathway of hell is, the pathway to hell is paved with good intents. Like, I feel like Helena more than lives up to that phrase, because unfortunately, whether you intended it or not, the party does not trust her because, let's go over her actions. She lied about her husband's death, never told her children that he was alive, even when they were going to the Western continent when they could have encountered him. They were not prepared for that. And then she made a deal with Cassandra, which I don't blame the methodology, the reasoning behind the deal, but she never told the party for 5 years, and that's a lot of time wasted. Like, whether it was from good intent or even if it was from good intent, the party just can no longer trust her because she has just set that precedent. And with this latest session, whether it was a genuine mistake, in her position, mistakes cost lives, which they have. So, how are you going to adapt to that? Because you're not going to. It's going to be a hard task to get the party to trust her again, even if that even is possible.
So, in terms of her, the way I see it, or how it's going to be adapted, is that she, when the party confronts her on her recent actions, she'll explain to them everything that's been going on. She'll full-heartedly, like, without the party even needing to go and backlash at her, she'll openly state it that she knows she's done wrong. She knows that she's made a mistake as soon as she realizes that she didn't get a hold of you guys in time. In terms of how she's going to let the party handle her, she's going to tell them that, yeah, I know I've made mistakes. That's why when it comes down to it, you guys are going to, Alred and Estine are going to be taking the throne. And in her eyes, she may fear that it's already coming to close, that she really is not fit to rule like she had thought anymore, and that maybe it might need to be done soon at some point, or at least getting a little bit of extra help with all this. Because Helena, although young as she is, she acknowledges that she has taken on a position that maybe at the time that she had thought she was, that she was taking the throne, she thought she was doing the right thing, that she felt that she was ready, and that she's going to soon quickly learn that maybe not entirely that she was not entirely ready. And for whatever the group decides to do with her next, she is willing to accept any fate that the group gives her, because she realizes that she's messed up on so many levels, and that the next person in line, albeit she'll know that they'll have to fix her mistakes, since they're going to be the one in power. They have say in the they have say throughout the land.
Yeah.
That she just hopes that whoever, that those who comes next before her does not make the same mistakes that she's made.
Mm-hmm. But
so
I think
that's how it's gonna be. That's how it's gonna be. That's how I'm going to be working along with that, because I know the group is going to be even more furious with her, and she'll know it. She knows already that the group is going to be mad at her whenever she sees them again.
And speaking of that, as much as we're, with speaking of anticipation, I believe I have let the elephant in the room pass long enough. Fury, the question that is quite literally on everyone's mind every time they meet Solis. What's with the hair, man?
Okay. Solis does actually have a reason for having hair, and it's not purely because I wanted to give her hair. No. There is actually, it's related to, again, the reason why she's a Phoenix Soul sorcerer and can actually set her hair on fire, that she does. It's, when I say Phoenix Soul, that's literally just the subclass. It's not because she has Phoenix blood in her.
That we're aware of.
That we're aware of. the original intent behind it that I do hope Jacob has not forgotten is that there was I don't want to say a plague as such, but there was or really a disease. It was more of a biological gene that was going around the Tao Shen's homeland. That certain people were born with this innate connection to the sun, and they were always born with this long flame-colored hair, and unless brought into proper training, by adolescence, their connection they would just burn. Literally, the power would consume them, and they just burn up. That's why Solis was taken from her family at such a young age into the temple of the Tao Shen to learn to train to control this energy so that she didn't literally burst into flames. Or, well, she still can. She just doesn't die doing it now.
My theory was, yeah. So,
Like,
okay.
She
but-
doesn't die while bursting. She can control that power now,
Yep.
as opposed to just being utterly consumed by it.
My theory was always that you were born in the elemental plane of fire, and that's why you had the hair. Because like you were a different breed of dragonborn from a different plane. That's why you had the fire powers, because it was innate to your origin as a being. That was always my headcanon, like my theory as to why Solis was that. So thanks for clarifying that.
Yeah.
All right.
Right. I haven't heard a lot of mention from it from Jacob, so I hope Jacob hadn't forgotten because we did have that conversation.
I have not forgotten.
No,
Not
don't
that I
worry.
don't trust you, it's just I know what
Look,
I'm like. So
To be fair, let's be fair here. When it comes to DMing, and I think Jacob can attest to this as well as I can, sometimes patience is a virtue, because like sometimes you can't just do everything you want to immediately. Sometimes you gotta just like you have to wait and
definitely
set it up.
agree.
Yeah, like
Definitely agree.
everyone here is a DM. We can all agree that sometimes it is patience. It's
Oh yeah. But at the same time, you can also wait far too long and forget.
yes,
Like
but I don't.
like the other session, I completely forgot that I'd given you Zeola's childhood best friend to use against me
Yep.
later on. I completely
Yep.
forgot.
Yeah.
It wasn't until I
will-
spoke with Alex after the session that I realized, oh shit, I did give him that character.
Yep. Anyways,
Yeah.
Jacob, you were saying?
I will say, in terms of that Solus, or Fury, in terms of Solus's hair thing, that is something that I've put on the waiting list for a little bit of time. And
Right, fair
reason
enough.
being is that there's a lot of other things that's being worked on throughout the campaign. It's still constantly developing.
Oh yeah, no,
I
don't worry.
can't,
I
can't
understand
go
that.
and do years worth of work,
Yeah, no,
well in
absolutely.
advance.
Yeah, no, I get that.
So-
I just wanted to make sure you hadn't forgotten about it. That's all. I understand needing time. Do not worry. I'm not angry or anything like that. I just wanted to make sure you hadn't forgotten.
No, yeah, I'm glad you actually said something about that, because, had you not, probably eventually I would have forgotten about it. And I do have an idea as to how that's going to be worked around.
Yeah, I mean, like,
It's just right now, it's
We're in the middle of lots
still-
of other
it-
things at the moment.
well, let's see what we're in the
a
middle
lot
of.
of other
Well,
things
first,
than
we're in the middle of dealing with this whole Shadowfell, because, Feywild's collapsed. That's bad for reality. The fact that this world hasn't died yet is honestly a miracle of God. Second, after that, we have to deal with Maria, because the situation in Cursing, it's just, like, has proven we cannot ignore her anymore. Like, that's the unfortunate reality of that. But anyways,
yeah.
getting back on topic, I had a question for you, Jacob, and I'm just genuinely curious, because I did mention the elephant in the room, but I am just curious, what was the history between Marlowe and the crown? Like, what was that history there? Because we got big tidbits of it, but we never learned how it developed. We never learned, like, why. And I doubt Helena's going to answer those questions anytime soon, so I'm just curious, how did Marlowe get in contact with these people, or how did they get in contact with him, and how did, the friendship between Xander and Marlowe bloom, so to speak?
So, in terms of the friendship between Marlowe, actually, I believe I have that answer for you. Let me actually give me like 5 minutes. Yeah, if you have another question for Fury, do ask that one. I have
Alright.
to go and find the answer because I have it somewhere.
This is why you take notes, people.
Fury, I'm gonna be honest here. Like, when you also were able to use the 4 elements, like, granted you had to train for yours on, like, your checks, I was surprised. I thought you were, as a player, I thought you were gonna double down on the fire element. Was that the intent, or like what was the intent there? I'm just genuinely curious.
The intent was originally just to make her purely a fire-based character, but as she's developed more and matured, I suppose you could say, it just made sense to me. Like, okay, she's seen that her original thoughts of the world was wrong. Maybe there is, it's still related to the Tao Shen because it's the other monasteries, the other tribes. So it's like, well, if I'm going to be going around to all of these tribes, maybe it would do me some good to learn their ways and just become more of a mature person and learn more and become more wise if I'm eventually to be like a diplomat to the other between the tribes, which I get the feeling she may end up being, if not eventually becoming the leader of the Tao Shen or what. I'm not saying that's going to happen. It's just she figured if there is such a future where she's going to a lot of different monasteries of the four elements and such, or indeed becomes the leader of the Tao Shen, it would probably be a good idea to be knowledgeable in more than just the Tao Shen's teachings.
And speaking of which, I do have a question for you, and this is just a hypothetical, because now that you know there's a fragment of Tao Xian left, and theoretically there would be fragments of the other gods, what would be the limit of what Solis would do? Like, let's say it came down to Solis's life being the catalyst to giving them a new existence, for lack of a better term. Would she make that
She
sacrifice? Or,
she probably would.
I was gonna say, or would she have someone else do it for her?
No, she
Because
would be the one to do it.
I was going to say, it's very possible that Garrick could be called upon to make that sacrifice, so why would she do it? Why would she want to? Because she does have her own, she does have her own agenda. She does have her own vengeance to complete. Why
She
would,
does.
why would she sacrifice all that? Like, what would be the mindset behind that if that should happen?
The mindset behind that is purely that she doesn't have the right to ask anyone else to make that sacrifice. It's her god, and her vengeance is against Cassandra for killing uh, Tao Shen. But if she could revive Tao Shen and other gods at the same time, then that's really more of a complete vengeance because that's not just getting revenge on Cassandra. That's undoing what Cassandra had done.
Yeah. All right. I was just genuinely curious because I was like, I thought to myself a while ago, there may become a time if it might become between the two of us if we need to revive them, and Garrick's more than willing to make that sacrifice. I just wanted to know what your thoughts were.
Definitely, if anyone's going to revive Tao Shen, it's going to be Solis.
All right. Note to self, I have a freebie. I'm just kidding. Oh, that'd be awful, wouldn't it?
Yep.
Okay, but no.
Yeah, definitely.
Oh no. Honestly, Garrick would try to argue with you about that, but we'll let that. If that situation does arise, we'll leave that to.
We'll cross that bridge when we get to
We'll
it.
cross that metaphysical bridge when we have no choice, when we die at it.
Yeah, we'll ignore that until we have no other options.
Mm-hmm.
That's Plan Z. We've got to go through Plans A through Y first.
Yep. But with that said, Jacob. Oh, okay. I guess he had to go AFK.
No, I'm still searching through to find it because.
Okay, Titan gave you a backstory. Okay.
Yeah,
another
the Titan gave me a backstory.
Yeah,
so
another.
I'm like, all right.
In that case, another Solis question, and this one is one I have been curious about since. Well, quite frankly, since like we've met Solis. Do you have an idea of who her parents are?
Yes, I do have an idea for actually most of her. Well, for her three, I guess, closest family, including her. She is not actually even an only child. She has a sister that she never knew, and parents that she never knew because she was taken for so young. I forget if I have extreme detail on her parents. I could probably go through.
I would prefer no spoilers because if that's going to be a
Jacob and
reveal, then I would
find
rather no
that.
spoilers. But
Yeah, fair enough. But yes, I definitely had at least at the very minimum a skeleton, shall we say?
You had
of
an
who her
idea.
parents
So
were.
you had an idea that you gave to
Yeah.
Jacob, and okay, I was just genuinely curious. I was like, I knew that was a big thing for Solis, like a family, like a place of belonging, but I didn't know how far you developed that concept. If you were like, okay, Jacob, here's this in detail. Jacob, here's a rough draft, or here's like a thesis, or Jacob, you decide. I just didn't
Yeah, no,
know.
I gave him a very rough draft. I was definitely more concerned about developing her sister.
Yeah, which I guess we'll find out who that is later. But
Yes, indeed.
yeah, I was just genuinely curious because, like, again, like a big part of Solis' journey, at least in my belief, is finding a real sense of belonging. And I'm gonna ask you this straight up: do you think she's found that sense of belonging with the party or the Tao Xian, both or neither?
Uh, she is currently questioning that decision herself because she's always, until very recently, she always thought she belonged with the Tao Shen because that's all she's known. But now she's met the party and gotten to know them. She definitely feels a connection to the party, whether or not she feels that's like a family connection or if it's just with friends slash traveling companions. She's still unsure. It's really one of her first times experiencing emotions like this, so it's definitely new for her. But at the same, and obviously she's had some of her faith in the Tao Shen shaken because of what she's learnt. Not shaken to the point that she doesn't feel like she could not belong there ever again, but it's definitely, I don't think she belong as snugly as she did once upon a time, unless they're willing to accept this new information that she's discovered. But on the whole, I don't think she hasn't fully found her place yet. I don't think she has definitely a couple of places she could fit. She's just not fully slotted in there yet.
All right, and speaking on that note, just because one could argue I could have bias in this question, but from a lore perspective, how does she view one particular party member of the party, in particular Garrick? Because not only is he, like the son of the woman you hate, but he also inherited your god's power. So like, there's a lot of baggage there, I think, like to deal with. So like, how does Solus view Garrick as a whole objectively? Because like, there are many ways I could see this, like either hatred or
He would
whatever.
deny, very vehemently deny that there's any negative feelings towards him. There is some inherent hatred because of who his mother was, and
Yes.
she can't help that, but she will vehemently deny that because she's definitely more interested. You didn't choose to be born to this bitch. That's just an unfortunate circumstance of reality. She's definitely more recently become more interested in actions rather than backstory. And as far as what she's seen to you, you've been a dear friend, a loyal companion, and though you are the son of this woman, you are actively fighting against her.
Yeah.
And even if there is hate, even if she hated your guts, as it were, there is, which she doesn't, by the way, there's always
Mhm.
the enemy of the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and you are definitely the enemy of her enemy.
Yeah, because like technically speaking, and this is a broad technicality, but technically, and I just realized this the other day, Garrick is technically not just like there is some genetic material from Tal Shian because Cassandra absorbed it. So like, I was just genuinely curious because like when you really think about it, uh, like there's like there has to be like a little bit of like a mixed baggage there, just because like his
There
character is
is
one thing.
definitely some subconscious hate, but she chooses not to act on that because you've proven to be, you are more than the sum
Yeah.
of your parts.
Well,
You've definitely proven to be definitely not on her side, and
oh fuck no.
from all the things you've done, you seem to be actively trying to reject. You've only just recently starting to learn to control that power, so you've
Yeah.
actively tried to reject that side of you for all this
Yeah.
time. So she's definitely, there is some subconscious anger that she can't get rid of because
Without
you
like
are,
dealing with it, because
yeah, but
yeah.
she's choosing to ignore that side. The majority of her brain sees you as you, not the fact that you have, in theory, some power slash genetic material of the absorbed Tao Shen, and you are the son of the being that killed her.
Yeah. Yeah. But speaking of which, I do have a question. Jacob, are you ready with the answer?
Yeah, so
Yeah, so Marlo.
the answer for that one.
Yeah, to remind everyone in case I forgot, Marlo's connection to the royal family. How'd it happen?
So how it happened is that Xander himself, as the group has discovered thus far, is that he's a bit of a research. He likes going out of the region to go and try to discover um a lot of history or mythos about some of the other continents, and how he stumbled upon Marlowe is that he went over to the eastern continent, albeit before he became king, and he landed on a little bit off the original designated area he was wanting to go to. He was wanting to go to the mainland, but he happened to land instead, due to some unfortunate weather, on the area where Marlowe's whole culture resides at.
So he was in Alestria.
Yeah, so he was in Alestria. Now, of course, with Marlowe's case, their people at the time were a bit. They didn't exactly hate people per se,
They're isolationist.
but they were very isolationist, and they only allowed quite a bit of few people into their homes, or at least those that were of either elves or regular humans. Now, if it was like a dragonborn or like even a tiefling,
well,
sometimes
tieflings
they were
typically.
more they were more widely accepted than that of a regular elf or human.
Which Xander
And
was
so,
human.
yeah, which Xander was a human. But after showing that he himself had no ill intent towards them, eventually they came around. They're like, all right, if you truly want to learn about our history, then will you trust in taking this test? And he's like, sure. And he went through and completed the test, and the person who was giving him the test was actually Marlowe. Marlowe at the time was the kind of son of the chieftain of the tribe, and he was soon to be chieftain. But after the two had many exchanges with one another, because he stayed there for a couple of months learning about the people of the Loxodon, which he found to be far more fascinating than what he probably would have found in Alestria on the northern part. Eventually, he offered Marlowe, if he wanted to do so, a chance to go through and kind of see the rest of the world in his eyes and bring back what he's learned to his people. And the chieftain and some of the other elders, they were a bit against it, but eventually they were like, you know what? You seem trustworthy enough. Then, if you want to go through and go on this journey, then we would be more than honored to allow you to go on this journey and have you to share information with one another. So Marlo was effectively kind of uh, a kind of a shoot. I know the
Basically,
term. A
a diplomat.
it's diplomat. That's the word. That's the term I'm looking for. He was effectively a diplomat between the
Alright.
two, and True formed quite a bit of a bond. But during this war, the bonds kind of shifted in the sense that they haven't been able to go through and offered help at the moment, and that's something that Helena actually had plans to do.
Which
Whenever Goodell was fully built back up again. It's just that currently Goodell is currently still in the process of being built back up, just not as much as Kirksmain.
Which that leads ultimately to a follow-up question I was going to ask. What is Marlowe's position in that civilization? Like, I can't imagine they all died. Like, assuming there were survivors, because somehow I doubt they were all wiped out. How would they view Marlowe? Because Marlowe did have a fall from grace. Like a very noticeable, like a very tragic one that could have been avoided, but it wasn't, and yeah, so like how would they view him?
So in terms of Marlowe, if you went through, hang on one second.
Yeah, like again, Fury, I know this isn't as interesting to you because you never really met Marlowe. Like this was
all right.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I had to wait for some things to
calm down. Yeah.
Yeah.
But anyways, how would
So
his people view Marlowe if they knew the full truth about what he became, or what she became, I suppose? Like, not just the gnome part, but their actions, how they, you know.
so right now with the gnome, they actually exiled Marlowe. Marlowe is not welcome back there any longer. When they found out that he was killed and essentially sort of resurrected by Lucius, they fear for their lives in a
Wait,
sense.
wait,
Like
he was resurrected by Lucius?
wasn't okay. He wasn't resurrected by Lucius
But he was
in
killed.
in a sense. He was killed by Lucius,
And then something else resurrected him.
and something else resurrected him, and he, you know, their entire population. They're not all wiped out now, but they're still trying to help fight back against Alestria, knowing that he was killed uh by Lucius and came back as a gnome. They feared something else worse could have happened, especially if he was killed by Lucius. They fear that Lucius had some part in his return, and thus, out of the safety of their entire village, they exiled him. And if they were to learn of his current deeds, they would have exiled him even further by practically shaming him and taking whatever whatever like markings or
Symbols.
culture or symbol, yeah, basically removing his symbols off of him, because that's not how their tribe works. That's an insult to their entire tribe.
Which.
So Marlowe, if Marlowe were to go back, he'd immediately be kicked out right on the spot.
He was already in exile.
Worse, he's already in exile. He, at that point, on top of being in exile, he'd basically be branded as a traitor.
Which, finally, I had to ask, because the departure of Marlowe originally was very sudden and very quick, and his logic was that apparently Alestia was going to attack his home immediately. If I had to put money on it, I'm pretty sure Marlowe was the aggressor there. Was that true? Is that assessment true? And if he hadn't gone back and been the aggressor, if I'm right, would his people actually have been attacked?
No. They would have still been attacked. Marlowe didn't exactly act as an aggressor. During his disappearance of him being killed, well, during the time of whenever he got himself killed, the Alestrian Empire were already making their moves and already slowly but surely putting their forces into that southern part of Alestria, putting their troops into that part of the land, invading their territory. Not exactly going and causing violence, but just stationing troops outside the borders for that and kind of setting up a checkpoint, which eventually, eventually the people on the other side, came over, they questioned what the heck was happening, and they eventually they assumed that they were basically going to go through and invade, which they were. They started to fight, and thus the whole revolution begun over there, and it's been going on for quite some time. So Marlowe was never really an aggressor there whatsoever, surprisingly.
All right. Well, in that case, that's all my questions for Marlowe. Here is
I actually, real quick, if it's all right, I would like to ask a question about Solis.
Sure.
Yeah.
Or, well, for Solis. So, Solis, as you are aware, Garrick has the capabilities of going through and has some form of Cassandra's power. And you know right now that Solis has been taught some of the ways to utilize that power. Now, if Solis goes and completes her quest, manages to successfully complete her quest that Tao Xian had given her. If the group of the other world, the tribes came together and they offered her the chance to obtain the elemental powers that their gods each had, would Solis choose to accept that power, or would she deny it?
You're kind like, what would that power entail? Would she become a god? Like you
Well, she wouldn't become a god. She'd kind of have similar powers to like her, like the father, for example, being able to control the elements in a sense.
Basically, she just becomes where the 4 elements monk.
Yeah,
well,
basically,
the abilities of them.
the abilities of them.
Yeah, because let's be fair here. If you or I became that, we would either have to sacrifice our levels and where we are already, or we would have to multi-class, and it would just not be a viable option.
Yeah, definitely not. Cause I think I dumped wisdom. I definitely dumped dex. I wear full plate armor. Definitely dumped dex.
Mhm.
Um, that's a difficult one. As of right now, possibly because she still sees Cassandra as an absolutely massive threat, and despite the party being very powerful, she doesn't think anywhere near strong enough to deal with her yet, and she's honestly not sure if the party ever will be. So, if before the battle with Cassandra, she would possibly be she would be less reluctant to accept such power if it would help in her quest. But after her quest, she may refuse. Honestly, on the premise of she's seen what power does to people.
And speaking of that, that's part of the reason why Garrick does envy you in a sense, because you have a choice in the matter. He never really did. This is all genetic, and you can't really get rid of that, unfortunately. And like, true, maybe a wish spell could, but one, you have to word that very carefully, or otherwise you fuck everything over. And two, Garrick's not likely to get access to a wish spell anytime in the future. So like, that's why he envies you, because you have the choice of refusing that power. Because in truth, he never wanted it, but he would rather learn how to control it, because he's afraid he'll just end up like his mother in terms of being like this person who's out of control, who never really mastered these powers, just using blunt force and raw power over genuine control. Yeah, alright. Well, and finally, and this is just a genuine question for Solis. And this is for a question for the player. Like, in general. If you had to change anything about Solis upon her introduction, what would it be and why, if you would want to change anything? If not, then this question is my new point.
I think I'm quite happy with how she ended up. I think, yeah, I think she's integrated well, and I'm very, as far as my original intent for her, it's going well. I think, if I was going to say truly, then maybe I would have maybe liked her to have been less affected by the party, so I could continue to be a bit of an asshole. But that's just me.
We're
being
changing
me.
your actions, buddy. We're not changing ours.
Yeah, fair enough.
All right.
No, yeah, no. Aside from just maybe the ability to be a bigger asshole than I am, no.
Yeah.
I'm very happy with how Solus has interacted with the party.
Well, what do you guys at home think? Whoever watches this, all 2 of you. Do you have any questions that we missed? Let us know in the comments. In the meantime, this has been Throwing the Podcast. Catch you later.